A cybersecurity career rarely starts with someone handing you an enterprise console and telling you to defend the perimeter.
It usually starts in the trenches: support tickets, agent troubleshooting, system administration, or figuring out why an endpoint sensor is interfering with a critical business app.
Those early operational friction points shape how you investigate, how you correlate logs, and how you act when alert gives you a signal without context.
Today, we are talking about how we built our security foundations and what operational capability actually looks like.
Welcome back to the Security Sandbox, where we discuss enterprise cybersecurity as it actually functions in production environments. My name is Chris.
And I'm Phil.
This is our second foundational episode. Today, hang on, because we're diving deep into how our careers were actually built, moving past the entry-level hand-waving and talking about real-world engineering, control enforcement, and operational realities.
We aren't offering a generic roadmap or selling certifications. We are examining the technical problems, visibility gaps, and operational missteps that shaped our approach to enterprise defense.
When people look at engineers and analysts, they usually see the title they hold now. They do not see the years spent analyzing threats, tuning tools, and learning how systems behave under pressure. Phil, with your focus on an EDR and endpoint telemetry, what systems experience gave you the foundation for how you evaluate threat vectors today?
So we touched on it in our first episode, but I'm going to go back to it, and I think my answer here is going to be, working my first IT role, doing IT support and help desk tasks, just developing, my basic skills. Troubleshooting is a huge plus, and we're going to get into that later in a couple segments down the road. But just investigating the issues that arise. For example, I was doing IT for a real estate development company, and we had a portfolio of hotels that we managed. So one of my tasks was, assisting with their IT needs. And one memory that I can remember was, on the phone with them, as well as the vendor, troubleshooting their credit card machines and their point of sale systems. So that was definitely a good, something good for me to, develop my troubleshooting skills. And then just learning the basics of the role and just understanding how computers worked, how operating systems work, the differences between different operating systems, how Active Directory works. That's a huge one to learn as well. And then networking stuff as well. And a little bit down the road, transitioning into cyber, I'm going to briefly mention this here because, again, I'll dive into it later on. Understanding how your environment operates and understanding your user's behavior within that environment. I like to use the phrase normal versus anomalous behavior. So your question about evaluating threat vectors in today's society, before you can actually isolate a threat and identify one, you have to know what normal activity in your environment looks like and what activity is anomalous or out of the ordinary. So really, I think knowing your environment makes it much more effective in identifying that anomalous activity and identifying those threats and being able to contain them while still not hindering the business. So Chris, you've worn a lot of hats across your working career, from everything from trucking and joining the Navy to working as a hardware tech and more recently becoming a subject matter expert in the DLP and remote access areas. Looking back on your previous roles, how did handling physical infrastructure and branch operations influence the way you approach remote access and data protection today?
That's a great question, and it actually covers several domains on the security side of the house. As an intern and working in IT, I had exposure to quite a few different scenarios, working with people in the back office, working with executives, sometimes under the boardroom table, running network cables, and also the unique experience of branch acquisition and setting up half a dozen to 10 or so branches with brand new thin clients, network connections, new switches, and assisting IT with those things. It really helped me step outside my comfort zone and get a good perspective of how branch users experience the environment in their day-to-day jobs. What I'm talking about is, they're working on thin clients, and the way that their applications run, it's in a very controlled environment. So it's very sensitive to, resource utilization and networking. So seeing how those, users were challenged with keeping things running smoothly for customer interactions and day-to-day business, that helped me understand that in IT especially, those are mission critical operations that cannot be disrupted. It gave me a lot of respect for the network admins and the sysadmins who were working painstakingly to troubleshoot problems. I also translated that when I transitioned over to cybersecurity and to information security team to help me understand that when we are deploying a new tool, such as DLP, we started a POC for the data loss prevention tool several years ago. And during that time, I had to figure out the best way to deploy the tool across Citrix environments, but also in relevant servers and, of course, endpoints, laptops, and desktops. With each of those scenarios, it prevents a different set of challenges and resource considerations you have to take into account. Also, when we get down further, and we're going to talk a little bit more about actually detection policies and prevention policies, making sure that those are appropriate for the cohort or the group that the system is set up to monitor and enforce policy with. So that was just one part of it, and it helped me help provide me with a lot of respect and understanding for people in different departments and even different subsidiaries. In our company, we have subsidiaries with users across the country, and that leads me to a remote access perspective. When users are accessing from home, they're accessing over VPN, they're traveling, and they need to check their email or their Teams or their Outlook from another country. You have to, consider all of those situations when we are setting up conditional access policies and MFA policies that establish device trust, and also to make sure it provides a nice, smooth experience for them to access the data that they need, but also just in case something happens with their account that it shuts down the bad guys. DLP is similar. I want to understand how the data is being used before deciding where to monitor, warn, or block unusual data movement or unusual access.
That kind of ties back into knowing your environment. What are your end users doing?
100%.
What is their kind of workflow on a day-to-day basis? And then once you kind of get that, you get that down, you kind of have a good idea of what you're looking for in terms of anomalous activity.
Absolutely.
Great. So shifting the conversation over to some support and troubleshooting questions here. So in my personal opinion, I think support and operations work teaches you something really crucial, and that is that more often than not, the issue that is being reported by an end user or by an IT admin is very often not the root cause of the issue. So what do I mean by that? For example, a user might say that our security tools are blocking their application from running, or one of our tools is blocking them from uploading a PDF to an online web portal, when in reality it's something completely different. Maybe network issues, maybe something else. But there are some cases where EDR in particular does step in and blocks unknown processes or applications.
Or, for example, user reports, I can't transfer this file to a trusted company application when CASB inline policy or DLP policy is blocking access due to, maybe an Entra, a device trust posture, or a risky session state. From a CrowdStrike perspective, Phil, when an endpoint agent flags a benign process or an admin blames an EDR sensor for slowing down a server, how do you approach isolating the sensor behavior from underlying OS issues?
Yeah, so I mentioned it before, and I mentioned it probably a couple times in the first episode, but I really want to just hammer home a couple points in this show. And one of the points is that troubleshooting is, I believe, a really valuable skill even past your IT support, help desk stuff. Within security, and this is a lot of, we touched on it in the previous episode where, our jobs are not always, sound the alarms, and bad guys are not just trying to constantly break through the firewall. It's a lot of testing and troubleshooting. So when I'm looking at EDR related issues, I kind of take a 2-step approach to that. I follow first information gathering, and then I proceed with testing. So with information gathering, I'm basically, communicating with either the IT admin or the end user that's reporting the issue, just getting some basic information that will help me troubleshoot, such as, when did the issue start? What is the scope of the issue? What I mean by that is how many servers or how many endpoints are affected? Are there any particular apps or files that are affected? If so, what are they? I will review our security policies within the EDR platform. Were there any updates to these policies? If so, when was the last time the tool applied an updated policy to the affected host? The other thing I'll do is if users are reporting missing files or an application that keeps crashing, I will go in and check our EDR logs for, process block events or file deletion events or file quarantine events to see if maybe the EDR agent is stepping in and, causing some sort of chaos. So after I, get that information, I'll move on to, part 2, which is testing. So basically I'm taking the information that I gathered and then running some tests, which includes, starters, cloning our production policy, identifying a handful of settings that, may be involved with quarantining these, operationally needed applications or files. I'll shut the setting off and I'll throw, the user's endpoint or the server in there to try and see what happens. If the issue goes away, then more likely than not, our tools are causing havoc, and we have to evaluate that. If the issue persists, then it might not be EDR this time. So after I'll get that test policy set up, I'll go in and I'll reach out to the end user or the IT admin and have them, try and recreate the issue, run the application again, run the script that they're trying to run, see if they can recreate the issue. If the issue goes away, again, it might be some setting that was enabled that is previously turned off. If the issue persists, it might, like I said, it might be EDR related. If needed, I will then, if my troubleshooting efforts are not successful, I'll reach out to the vendor and work with their support team. A lot of the times with EDR stuff, there's managed service provider circumstances. They can help troubleshoot from time to time. At the end of the day, if you're running in a managed service policy, though, you can't just willy-nilly turn this setting on and turn this setting off, because then you're essentially breaching your contract that you have with that managed service provider. So they'll work and they'll create like a modification policy, and they'll tell you, hey, we'll turn this off. Let's test it again. And then the last thing I'll mention here is you can also work with your vendor to create exclusions. This in particular, you want to be very careful with. For example, you want to make sure that we're not creating what I call over permissive exclusions. So essentially being very fine-grained as possible, not excluding an entire directory from being scanned or monitored by your EDR tool. But yeah, to summarize that I'll take a 2-step process when troubleshooting, EDR-related issues or EDR agent-related issues, gathering that information, and then with the information that I've gathered, start running some various tests and troubleshooting from there.
It's very thorough.
Yes, I try and be as thorough as possible.
Yeah.
So moving over to you as the DLP subject matter expert, how does managing the DLP tool and deployment of the DLP agents themselves shape your view on troubleshooting? I know we talk about it all the time, but DLP tools at the end of the day are notorious for creating user frictions at times. So I'd like to hear your insights and your workflows for working through those.
Well, actually, that's a really good question because DLP troubleshooting has taught me not to assume the tool is wrong or the user is wrong. You have to understand what they're trying to do first. So I like to back it up to what happened when and what led up to that. One of the most important aspects personally for troubleshooting is context, especially in relation to the DLP tool. Not just that there was an upload. What directory were they in? Were they in a map drive? Is it possibly a SMB issue? Is it a browser extension issue? So I'm thinking about the health of the endpoint, the health of the browser, the health of all the plugins. And also with endpoints, it's situational for where they are. It's not a continual, it's not a constant that if they're in the office and they're connected with an Ethernet connection with a dock, that is going to be the same scenario if they're home on their own Wi-Fi. There are variables with home Wi-Fi that are outside of our control, but you have to consider those, that if there is a problem with activity, data movement, that it may be DLP, it may not be. So we have to kind of look at the whole picture, take it one slice at a time. And one of the most important things, getting back to one of our favorite sayings, logs never lie. Turn on trace logging, turn on extended logging. I'm very grateful that the tool that we have has the capability of turning on extended logs on one specific endpoint. That will give us greater visibility into the millisecond by millisecond activity, what's happening in the agent, auditing all the processes that are running in the background. So if we do see whether it's slowness on the endpoint or problems with uploads or file activity, then we're going to be able to narrow down if it is DLP or if it isn't. And sometimes it is. A lot of work is separating true policy issues from an agent issue, application behavior, or legitimate business process that we didn't account for. They may be working with a new application that we weren't aware of, and IT may not be aware of. So getting that context adds, more value to your troubleshooting. So you're not just shooting blind and assuming that they're trying to go from A to B and they're actually going from A to H, and we didn't even know that H existed. So that helps quite a bit. But the ultimate goal, of course, is to reduce risk without making people fight the controls every click along the way. When friction appears, I treat it as feedback. That helps me guide my policy, creation and enforcement, deployment, and helps me the communication. It may need to be adjusted if I have to get a hold of IT.
And I know a lot of people talk about it, but it is true that there needs to be a level balance between, security tools and operational efforts. Yeah, we can lock
100%.
something down. We could lock something down rock solid by unplugging it from power and disconnecting it from the internet, but the business will not be able to function.
Well, the most secure endpoint in the world is one that doesn't have a connection to the network. Right?
Exactly.
And if we just turned off all network access, our problems will be solved, especially from the EDR and DLP side of the house.
Good job, security.
Well, yeah, absolutely. When an EDR alert gives you that host, that computer level visibility, but an enterprise incident rarely lives on a single computer or host. Correlation across controls, that's where the real investigation begins.
Yeah. So when an alert comes into our SIM or any one of our consoles, how do you personally correlate that alert across all of our different data sources like DLP, CASB, Entra ID, remote access? So how do you personally put those pieces together to understand exactly what happened and why that alert triggered?
I like to, again, go back to the user and work with the timeline and work outward from there. I go upstream to where the actual event took place with the user, and that happens in DLP. I'm once again very grateful that we have that data loss prevention and user activity log because we're able to make those correlations, not just scraping through raw logs in CrowdStrike or in Entra or one of our other tools. That's able to provide a lot of context and help us understand, exactly what is happening. And if it was user initiated Or is it following a click through on an email? Did they follow through to a website? What was that website? That'll show up in DLP logs. That'll show up in the firewall. They'll show up in the SIM. So you put all of those together to make a cohesive picture. So you're able to make establish a source of truth from multiple tools. It's effective sometimes if we didn't have all of those to, become very proficient at looking through logs in your SIM, whether it's Rapid7, Sentinel-1, you pick the vendor out there, they all provide log data. But parsing that out into human understandable language can be a challenge. And then we also have our own attention limitations where you're scraping through screen upon screen of logs. If you have a tool like DLP where it presents a logical timeline from top to bottom, from A to Z, that makes things a little bit easier because you're then looking at timestamps back in CrowdStrike and say, I can see that this occurred just before the event happened. On the endpoint side, CrowdStrike captures execution, memory injections, network connections from the host. Where do you see analysts trip up when trying to determine if host activity is malicious versus a complex, legitimate admin script or a deployment tool?
Yeah, so for me, I know I mentioned it before, and I'm going to mention it later on as well, but I think it's very important to know your environment. It can definitely be tough to do so when you're first starting out on a new security team. Of course, if the environment is massive, like a Fortune 500 company environment, or if it's just, a small mom and pop environment with 50 employees, it's really, I think it's really helpful to kind of learn that as you're coming on board within 6 months or 8 months or however long it takes to really get a good grasp of what's normal and what's not. Like I said, I'm going to dive into it more later and probably sound like a broken record, but I think it's important. So I just want to reiterate that. And, so yeah, basically what you're looking for is, going back to like scripts and applications. Are they something that have been seen in the environment before? A good way to check that is if you have a SIM set up. And for those that don't know what that is, it's a security information and event management tool. You could go in and check your SIM logs and, see if whatever .exe has been run before, or if has this particular PowerShell script been executed before. It depends on how long the organization retains their logs for as well. But having that historical, blueprint there, you can really help identify what's any anomalous behavior or if this activity is, normal. Correlating different data sources is a huge point to it as well. Being able to put, pieces of the puzzle together. And another thing that I see, I think I would see, entry-level analysts thinking is, we have to close all these alerts and we need to, make sure our SLAs are met and we need to keep a clean dashboard. Well, you can close as many alerts as you want and you can say, hey, go to the board and say, hey, we're closing 5,000 alerts every month. We're not actually doing that, obviously, but you could, just throwing it out there as an example, hey, you could close 5,000 alerts every month. That's great, but are the alerts valuable? And how many of those were true positives, or how many of those were false positives, just alerting on normal everyday activity from IT admins or end users? We'll touch on it a little bit later, but communication is really key, when trying to determine if something is, anomalous or normal. And what I mean by that is if you see something come in, you're unsure about it, reach out to IT if it's some script that's running or some cron job that's set up that you haven't seen before, reach out and ask them, hey, is this, one of your normal processes, before going in and quarantining the device and again, risking, crippling the operations of the organization if you're quarantining, a domain controller. It's ridiculous kind of saying that, but yeah, just communicate with your IT team and, before you take any, rash actions. Now, on the other hand, if you're on call and you're seeing this weird PowerShell script executing on a file server at 3 in the morning and you can't get a hold of IT, and it might be, not speaking for everybody, but it might, might warrant some investigation and maybe a containment of that system. You're creating some potential, operational issues for, the IT staff when they come in the morning. But would you rather have, a couple hours of operational issues, or would you rather have to deal with an incident that could take, 2, 3, however many months to resolve?
Absolutely. And it goes beyond containing servers. It could be resetting passwords, could be revoking sessions in the cloud. It could be isolating an endpoint, a computer from any network access until we complete our investigation. Those are very disruptive to somebody's day. And in the middle of the night, if you're kind of on call by yourself and you're making the best decision for that moment, then be ready to stand behind it with some evidence that shows in the logs, right? Because you wouldn't just make that decision out of thin air.
Exactly. And that helps. You can make better decisions if you know your environment and know, hey, we're seeing some potential red flags here.
Right. And on the DLP side, in quite a few of our tools, they flag, the history of the machine or the account as risky. And it also gives us a little bit of color and context. If somebody has, been in the situation of being very attacked or targeted by business email compromise. If that is happening, and then we are seeing unusual or anomalous behavior in their sign-in logs or on the endpoint, they may have clicked on something because they're receiving a barrage of those attacks, and they may be trying to then laterally move to a more privileged server or a part of the domain. So, and this is really getting deep in the weeds. I love this stuff. We could talk about this for hours, and I know that we do.
Yeah.
But, operational realities and then industrial myths, the way I speak about that is, the way social media frames cybersecurity. And some people think, well, I got to I got to get into bug hunting. I've got to get into, threat hunting and red team and pen testing. This is, to me, very exciting, maintaining operational efficiency with the ultimate, not the ultimate, but the most efficient and effective level of security possible. We look sometimes in social media, we see threat hunting highlighted as the goal. I want to be the best threat hunter, or offensive exploits, looking for those vulnerabilities. Passive dashboard monitoring. Maybe you think, well, I'm going to get in and just look at a console. But the reality inside a financial services organization or enterprise environment, it's heavily bound by governance. And we want to highlight that right now. Change controls, change management, and other architectural constraints.
Yeah, and as you and I and probably every other security engineer knows, security policies aren't always 100% perfect. And I know I've heard you mention it before with, DLP being 80-20 or 90-10. So I wanted to ask you, what happens when a security policy, even though it's properly implemented on the technical side, for example, like we're saying, a block all DLP policy, collides with the critical enterprise operations?
Honestly, that's where security has to work with the business instead of simply being the department of no. We do sometimes get characterized that way. But first, I want to understand what the operation is that's being blocked and whether the access or data movement is truly required. Also looking at the user privileges. There's such a thing in security as role-based access controls, least privileged concepts. Does the user, are they expected to be able to access that data? And are they in the appropriate security groups, have been properly approved and set up to get those permissions to access that data? From there, we look at controlled exceptions or safer workflows. What I mean by that is, who is going to own the exception? Those are approved by managers or even a CISO in many situations where we have to have a controlled exception because of the exact specific situation where a user is on an iPad, they're on a laptop, a desktop, they're on an unmanaged device. It might be a board member. They don't have necessarily, an assigned computer. They may be on a mobile device or different scenarios. How are we going to make that the most safe while creating controlled exceptions? There needs to be clear ownership, limited scope, and monitoring. The policy can be technically correct, but if it breaks critical processes, the control design still needs to be worked. From an EDR standpoint, what are those realities of deploying and maintaining agent coverage? And I know that this is a big one with you because it can be a pain point across the vast enterprise environment with multiple subsidiaries being involved.
Yeah, so I think testing is really the main key for, successfully deploying EDR agents or any security tool in general. The best practice, in my opinion, is to, deploy, especially if you're onboarding a new EDR product, deploy it to 20, 50 test systems before a full enterprise deployment. Just in case anything goes south, you're not, again, taking down every system in the environment. One thing that I really like to do is instead of running the newest available agent, I will sometimes run in, what's called an N-1 posture. So to explain, if anybody doesn't know what that means, it's essentially you're not running the newest agent, but you're running the second to newest agent. And the thinking about or behind that is, if new versions of agents are releasing, there's a lot of times, there's bugs that are unforeseen that could, cause operational issues. So I guess my philosophy for that is, let other customers of this who also use the same tool as you, let them run the latest agent first, hash out all the bugs so that by the time that quote unquote newest agent, by the time you move to that and there's a newer agent that comes out and then that agent becomes the N-1 agent, hopefully most of those bugs have been kind of hashed out by the vendor and they've issued, patches or fixes. From a managed service perspective, again, it's really important to keep up to date on, operating model changes. So if the vendor decides to enable another setting in your prevention policies, if they disable another setting, for example, it's very important to keep up with that and track that. Usually there's a couple weeks that, they give you before flipping the switch. But if you're an SME and you're owning the console, specifically, EDR related, you need to be aware of, changes from that, your managed service provider or your vendor is going to be making. And you need to escalate those to make the rest of the team aware, make your supervisor aware, and then we'll talk about it down below, but, make other teams aware as well. If these changes, create operational issues, work with the vendor. Again, like I mentioned above, work with their support team, create exceptions in your policies that are not overly permissive. But like I said, at the end of the day, find the balance between security and operational effectiveness. As an SME in the EDR space, I always really like reading the release notes that get sent out every week or month or however often they come out, just kind of seeing what's coming, seeing what's been fixed. Just, being informed. And then if I see something like a new feature that's coming out, I'll pass it on to the team, say, hey, this is coming down the pipeline. This might be interesting to start testing. And we'll repeat the testing steps. We'll test it in a policy targeting 20 or so hosts. And then if it works out, great. If it doesn't, we'll have to reevaluate. Yeah, basically, like I said before as well, if you want to test another setting that's coming out or you want to make a policy change, it doesn't have to be testing a new system or setting either. If you want to make a policy change that could potentially affect the operationalness of the business, so a lot of organizations have, and I know you mentioned it and I mentioned earlier, but what's called a change management process. So basically, say there's a new EDR setting that I want to test out. before even enabling it or before even testing it on one system, I'm going to submit a change management request. I'm going to submit it to my manager, say, hey, this is the setting I want to test. This is what it's going to do. If it fails or if there's an issue, this is the backup plan. Just getting that documented. And this is kind of going into the whole audited environments where some organizations are heavily audited. Auditors come in and they like to see, documentation of all these changes. So yeah, basically they'll submit that and you'll have, buy-in from other key stakeholders. So usually it's the security team, the IT team, the networking team, just basically any key stakeholder that the change would affect. And then I also wanted to just wrap this up by touching on agent health. A lot of the tools these days have, dashboards monitoring for agent connectivity issues or agent status. Is the agent offline? If so, how long has it been offline for? Is it stuck trying to update itself? And like I said, you have dashboards. You can also create, weekly or daily reports or even a workflow that emails you if a sensor's been offline for, 30 days. I want to know about it. If an agent is, aging out, if it hasn't updated in 30 or however often your update frequency is set to, I want to know about it. You want to have visibility to that. And, if you come into an issue with like a bugged agent, take my example of it not updating, it might warrant an uninstall and a reinstall of it. So yeah, it's important to keep your agents healthy from an EDR perspective.
Well put.
Yeah. So let's see here. I want to kind of touch on, formal education versus operational judgment moving into our next segment here. There's been an ongoing debate, and I think there will continue being an ongoing debate about, formal degree programs versus hands-on technical experience. To me, in practice, I think both serve completely different functions and are both, useful in their own ways.
Absolutely. Degrees and formal studies provide framework knowledge, those fundamentals, and help you get that analytical discipline. But operational experience teaches you what to do when those theoretical models fail during live degradation or a misconfiguration. Where did operational exposure teach you something about system behavior that a textbook or a lab didn't cover in class?
Yeah, so you can read, in my opinion, you can read as many textbooks as you want, and you can, play around in your lab environment as much as you. And I encourage it. I encourage the hands-on, practical, set up a home lab. But I think there's two main things that, a lab environment doesn't teach you. And the first one of those is operating under pressure, especially during, high stress situations. If there's an active threat going on, not a potential threat, an active threat that we've confirmed. If there's, somebody's in the network and they're trying to laterally move to another machine or a domain controller, it's really important to, stay calm. And again, good communication is really key when, working in these environments of, pressure and stress. Kind of tying into other segments that we've talked about and we're going to talk about, if we do see a concerning alert, we're going to want to gather the evidence. Again, tying back to, correlating from other data sources. Don't just rely on the alert, use your other tools, DLP, Entra, look at the sign-in logs, look at, a user's activity if you think a user's account has been compromised. A big part of it as well is I always like to, and when we're working together, we're bouncing ideas off of each other. I mean, alerts, ideas, hey, can you give me a second set of eyes on this? Or, hey, what do you think about, this policy or rule? I think it's really important to discuss any findings that you may uncover when, looking into a potential active threat. Discuss those with your team members before you're just jumping to a conclusion. Or, discuss that with your team. Say, hey, this threat actor might be trying to laterally move. They're on this system right now. Can we proceed with quarantining it? And that kind of leads into my second point, which a lab can't really teach you, and that's actually working in an enterprise environment and keeping that environment, running and operational for all hands on deck situations, like an active threat or a vendor outage. Working together with multiple teams, like your IT team or your network team, to restore that business and get it back up and running. It's really important to again communicate with those teams, and you don't want to be fighting back and forth with them. Your tool is blocking me and I can't do this, that, and the other thing. It's really important to stay calm, keep the business running. And you can even help your other teams if your organization has again a sim set up, and you can provide IT or networking with logs that you're capturing to help them diagnose a potential issue, like a Microsoft outage or a network issue. Provide them the logs to kind of help them out. Yeah. So, and then the other thing in terms of keeping the business running, controlling security agents from a resource perspective. So if you get a message from an admin saying, hey, your EDR tool is consuming 70% of memory, that's a problem. We're going to need to maybe there's a bug. Maybe we need to uninstall it and reinstall it, see if the problem goes away.
And you can't replace that hands-on diagnostic capability and experience with just another certification. It takes time, and it takes situations coming up that a classroom is just not going to expose you to. There's a wide gap between passing a multiple choice exam and troubleshooting a real conflict in the wild.
And you may be asked about, if there's an incident on an exam, what is the best thing to do? But I don't think for me, I don't think, being asked that and experiencing, the potential stress and pressure of, actively working in a situation like that can, be matched with answering a multiple choice question like that. It's just my opinion.
Certifications are going to help you understand the structure, such as the OSI model, and maybe understand some operational things about networking or Active Directory. They're going to help fill those knowledge gaps, but they don't replace real-world experience. In my personal experience, if you're going to work in cloud, you're going to work in GRC, identity access management, data governance, regulatory environment. The hard part is seeing how those controls interact once they meet actual day-to-day business operations. I see certifications as a way to strengthen your foundation, but don't rely upon them solely to help you be more effective at the job. What they do is they provide credibility in the cybersecurity and information security industry, especially in a regulated company. They can provide that competency check that says, yes, I do have an entry-level understanding of these things, but it doesn't mean that we are necessarily SMEs or experts or engineers ready to take on security controls and management in a complex.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you're actually in the process of studying for a certification yourself at the moment. How would you evaluate? Yes, you're a busy guy.
Yeah.
So how would you kind of touched on this a little bit, and we kind of touched on it a little bit, but going back to it, how would you evaluate certifications today versus practical and hands-on experience when looking at, different complex areas of the field, like security engineering and cloud security and IAM, GRC, all those fun things?
I think that the certifications have their place, but also so does on the job training. What I mean by that is, okay, if you are new to the security field, then get your Security Plus, get your ISC Squared certified in cybersecurity, get those tests under your belt, and that will help provide a little bit more of a well-rounded understanding of how enterprise cybersecurity actually functions. But, they will possibly open some doors, but you don't want to necessarily use them as filling a gap in your understanding. That's where you go to the on-the-job training, or if you're trying to get into into a company, into the industry, or if you want to move further in your role. Sign up for every single thing that relates to the topic that you're interested in, that you feel you can have a better grasp on. For example, AI security. There's a lot involved with AI security. It's not just one single thing. Post-quantum computing. There is not one single aspect to post-quantum computing that will help you be a well-rounded person, and there's no certification on post-quantum computing. Those of risks to the risk, from a risk perspective, that's going to introduce issues in the next 5 to 10 years that no company and no analyst, no engineer has ever seen before. So do they mention it maybe in a CISSP or in an advanced networking class or a certification? Possibly. But you really want to take that as initiative and say, I'm going to learn as much as I can about this, so I have enough understanding. One thing that my college professors taught, and it's a pretty common thing, but I found a lot of value in, is learn something in such a way that you could teach somebody else. Can you put it in plain language enough for somebody else to be able to grasp complex and abstract concepts that are involved with the topic you're studying? In cybersecurity, it's no different. To be able to take those and translate those from a textbook or a certification course and just share it with somebody else that you're working with or that has an interest in cybersecurity, and try to explain it to them. That will help you get those foundational roots in place so that you actually can piece A and B together and not just words on a screen or in a textbook.
So yeah, kind of talking about technical accountability here. I think technical growth requires self-progression, accountability, and in some cases even mentorship. Having senior members of the team on our team, there's some people that have been there 10, 15 years, having those individuals on the team to push you to justify your technical conclusions accelerates development faster than simply working by yourself in a silo.
Absolutely. Taking input from many different sides, not only on the team, not only from management, but from other departments, that helps develop us and helps us grow as technicians, engineers, and analysts. And for yourself, what was a key piece of guidance, maybe a takeaway that you had early in your career, early on when you started, that changed the way that you analyze security events today?
Yeah, and I don't want to steal my own thunder because I'm going to evaluate on it later on in our final segment. But for me, I'm not saying I'm a seasoned veteran. I've been in the field about 3 years for the security risk management field for about 3 years. But I think one thing that I've picked up on is don't just focus on a single alert, and this ties into what we were talking about earlier on in the discussion. Rather than relying on that alert as a central data point, correlate evidence with other data sources. If you have a SIM set up, check the DLP logs, check the network logs, check the firewall logs. And again, I always think of the analogy of putting pieces of a puzzle together to ultimately understand what activity triggered that alert and why was the alert triggered.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So how has I mentioned that we have on our team, we've had people that have been there for 10, 15 plus years. So how is working alongside them across maybe GRC and the network side of the house influenced how you approach information security and risk management as a whole?
I feel really fortunate, having worked my way up in this company and had the opportunity to partner with several different teams in different parts of the organization, even different subsidiaries. That has helped expose me to the realities that risk rarely lives in one tool or on one team. Each of them poses and produces their own risk. And they may be aware of it, they may not. And that's part of our role sometime, is to bring that risk forward and present it in a logical but also a professional manner. GRC, for example, helps frame business impact. governance, risk, and compliance. When people are onboarded or when people are promoted or they change departments, what those permissions look like as those controls are changed and as those directory groups are modified. Also, while working in an EDR or a network, that's going to show technical exposure that looks completely different. And having those network partnerships or people maybe that have a subsidiary where they're mostly in the cloud, having those close relationships with those team members helps give you insight, because not everything is exactly the same for every department. And that's made me more collaborative. It's made me more of a better student. I'm a big advocate for lifelong learning. There's no one point where you say, okay, I've got my degree now, I've got my certification, I'm done with everything. Now I finally arrived and I'm all set for my career. That's not true. We are constantly presented with opportunities to learn from people around us. And sometimes you just have to open your eyes and open your ears a little bit differently and say, what can this person teach me about their environment? What can this user show me about their team, about their workflows that's going to help me understand better before very strict or disruptive policies are put in place? So a lot of it is about just having the proper learning attitude. And that kind of comes along with the territory, because it's going to be really difficult to work in a cybersecurity or information security field and be set and stuck in time. I got my degree 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 20 years ago, and I knew all I needed to know then. That's going to set you at a disadvantage for the present day threats that are coming at companies, especially that are AI accelerated. So always be ready to partner, collaborate, and take a mentorship with somebody and say, teach me a little bit about how you do what you do. And I think that helps you add value not only to the company, but also add value to your team to have a better, well-rounded understanding of how everything works together when you're working in very specific tools that can impact or disrupt user activity. To wrap up our main... Oh, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
And just to add to the discussion, the cyber landscape it's always changing. So, I mean, if you're learning something now, in 5 years' time, it might be, obsolete or on its way out the door. And another important thing to know, and kind of tying into the mentorship factor, and I know we have talked about it before, but the reality is you're not going to be an expert in every area of cyber. So being able to, consult with your team members who may have a little bit more knowledge in this particular area, I'm not as strong in GRC, so talking with some of the GRC folks, teaching me some of more of what you do and help me understanding more. I think that's really valuable as well.
Absolutely. The whole picture, and that's why I think one of the advantages with our department and our team specifically in our industry is we are, there are people in back offices or in departments or in branches. They may get isolated and they may get siloed where they're kind of in a day-to-day routine with their little ecosystem. Not little demeaning, but just saying that there's a very limited people that are working in their team, and that's kind of where they operate. I feel like we have the opportunity to work with multiple disciplines across several departments and subsidiaries. It gives us greater exposure and opportunity to learn about how this investment company this team does their thing, and how branch admin does their thing, and how the insurance side, how that operates. It's really cool, and I feel like we get kind of a privileged opportunity to be able to partner with those teams. So, but pivoting now, I want to, we're going to be kind of wrapping up with discussion about misunderstandings. There's going to be things that you misunderstand about your role when you're coming into the industry. You may have been seeking for, to be a bug hunter or a pen tester. You may have been hunting certifications, but there are things we definitely get wrong early in our careers.
Yeah, so I can kind of go into, the main thing that I, just assumed. And, that was really thinking that a security alert was just definitive, that was it. It was a definitive statement of truth rather than, a starting point that required additional investigation or validation. So, for example, if a critical alert fired, it was to me an automatic all hands on deck. This is urgent. We need to drop what we're doing and, look at it immediately. That's not necessarily the case. Kind of working in the field more, a couple of years now, an alert really indicates that there may be an active threat or there might be some behavior that's anomalous. But at the end of the day, you can't just assume that. You've got to dig into the logs and, validate that before sounding the all hands on deck alarm. So, for example, if we get a critical severity alert for a user escalating privileges to a domain admin, generally not great to see, but take a step back before sounding the alarm. Look at your other areas of information. For example, if this is a new user or a new account that has never been seen, check the help desk ticket, see if there's an add user request for that. In an audited environment, usually you're required to keep a record of all onboarded employees, and same thing if they're leaving, can keep a record of have their accounts been deleted. Check for a new user request for that user. If it's an IT user, then suddenly giving them a domain admin or another privilege, it makes a little bit more sense. Yes, it's expected, but again, validate. What does that look like? Reaching out to the IT team. Hey guys, are you hiring this new admin that requires these privileges? Reach out to the identity and access management administrator that granted those privileges. Hey, I saw your account added so-and-so to, the domain admins group. Was this you? So it's good to validate. Now, on the other hand, if you see a teller's account getting elevated to, a domain admin, probably a good time to involve the rest of the team and maybe look at disabling that account. Another example, if a user is logging into a new endpoint for a first time, if that's not necessarily a critical alert, but if you see that alert in your environment, again, take a step back, don't assume the worst. Kind of, especially for new analysts, again, I'm going to reiterate, learning your environment is crucial. Learn IT's naming convention for your assets. If the user is logging into, first initial, last name, laptop dash new, if the user is logging into their own, new computer, yeah, it's going to be anomalous because your system hasn't seen that computer in the environment before. But if they're getting a new computer, if there's a hardware request saying, hey, so-and-so is getting a new computer, not as much of a big concern if they're logging into their own new computer. It's normal behavior. On the other hand, if there's a privileged account or a service account logging into a random computer for the first time, again, a little bit more anomalous. Potentially want to, start looking into that. And as a SIM SME, I really wanted to, touch on this. Rule tuning and rule creation are very important parts of managing a SIM. Don't alert on something just for the sake of alerting on something. You can, turn on all these rules and say, hey, look, guys, I have 500 rules turned on and we're going to be getting alerts for all of these rules. Again, that's great, but are those rules actually benefiting your team and are they benefiting your organization, or are they just creating noise? If your SIM product has all these, vendor created templated rules, don't just turn them on because they exist. Evaluate them, see if, it would fit your environment. Does it add value to the environment? And more often than not, you're going to need to tune them anyways to kind of fit your environment's behavior. So coming full circle, yeah, just to getting the most value out of the rules, alert on activity, like I said, that's, uncommon or anomalous because alert fatigue is 100% real. So if you're, you have all these rules created and you're alerting on, all these alerts that are just IT and your end users doing their job, when an actual true positive alert comes in, it's more than likely going to get missed because your teams are just trying to, keep the dashboard clean and they're just trying to close all these alerts. But to kind of wrap up my segment here, I think no tool is 100% perfect. So Again, if an alert triggers, more likely than not, you're going to want to validate it just to confirm instead of, right off the bat sounding the alarm.
I really appreciate that we're diving so deep in the weeds here. The information security and cybersecurity fields, they really do encompass multiple tools, multiple environments, and it's custom based upon the company that you're working with. But for me, I had to realize that security tools, they don't operate in isolation. You may work in one tool or be a specialist in one tool or an SME, but you have to think broader as far as, enterprise operations, IT, and all of the departments and subsidiaries that you may be working on. I could think of DLP in ways from my own perspective as, will this help stop data loss? Or will a conditional access policy or device trust control stop unauthorized access? In reality, those controls are only effective when they have the right identity context and visibility into what is happening on an endpoint. Security careers are built one layer at a time. Tech support, systems work, troubleshooting, they give you the foundation to eventually handle more complex engineering and security decisions.
And security tools like your EDR platform or your DLP platform or your cloud application security broker platform, they provide powerful visibility, but technical judgment and cross-team communication are what really turn that visibility into something useful.
100%. And as Phil mentioned many times, you have to understand the systems behind the tools you use. Question the telemetry and what it's actually telling you. Always account for operational needs of the business that you're protecting.
Yeah, so in closing, we want to hear from the listeners that are tuning in, whether it's on audio only or on YouTube. We want to hear from you, whether you're a student, a new SOC analyst that's just breaking into the field, or a seasoned professional. Our question for you guys is, what non-security technical domain has helped your investigative thinking the most?
100%. It's important that we get the community and audience engagement. Share with us those technical skills that help make you better at investigating problems. Let us know, and we'll showcase those on the show. So please keep your examples anonymous and vendor neutral, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Till next time.
Stay curious, stay secure, and keep experimenting inside the security sandbox.